Emma's bright blue eyes sparkled as she played with her favorite toy, a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Fluffers, in the hospital bed. But despite her brave smile, the machines beeping around her told a different story. 8-year-old Emma was fighting for her life, her tiny body ravaged by a rare and aggressive cancer. Her single dad, John, sat beside her, his eyes welling up with tears as he held her small hand in his. He had done everything he could to save her, from researching the latest treatments to pleading with doctors to try anything, no matter how experimental. But the medical bills were piling up, and hope was dwindling. John's face was etched with worry lines, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. He had sacrificed his own life for his daughters, working multiple jobs to make ends meet. But it wasn't enough. The hospital was threatening to shut down Emma's treatment unless he could come up with a large sum of money. As John looked around the hospital room, he felt a sense of desperation wash over him. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on him, the beeping machines a constant reminder of the ticking clock. He knew he had to do something, but what? That's when he saw him, a tall, imposing figure with a kind face and piercing blue eyes. It was Marcus Thompson, the billionaire CEO of Thompson Innovations, a company known for its cutting-edge medical research and generosity. Marcus had made a name for himself as a philanthropist, donating millions to various causes and hospitals. But John had never thought he'd be the one standing in his daughter's hospital room, his eyes locked on Emma's tiny form. Yet there he was, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Mr. Thompson, sir," John stammered, his voice shaking with gratitude. "Thank you for coming. I don't know what we would do without your help." Marcus's expression softened as he gazed at Emma. "Please call me Marcus. We're going to get through this, John, I promise." As Marcus spoke, the machines surrounding Emma began to beat more rapidly, the monitors flashing with a new reading. John's eyes widened in shock as Marcus continued. "We've been working on a new treatment, one that's shown incredible results in clinical trials. I think it might be the key to saving Emma's life." John's heart skipped a beat as he stared at Marcus, a glimmer of hope flickering to life. Could it be true? Could this stranger really be the answer to his prayers? The hospital's doctor, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, rushed into the room. "Mr. Thompson, I didn't know you were here. We're running some tests trying to determine the best course of action." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. "I've already spoken to the team. We're going to run the new treatment, see if it works. I want to make sure Emma gets the best care possible." As the doctor nodded and began to explain the plan, John felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, his daughter would make it through this after all. But as he looked at Marcus, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat, a look of intense focus, a glint in his eye that seemed almost calculating. John's instincts kicked in, his mind racing with questions. What was Marcus's true motive for helping Emma? Was it just a kind gesture, or was there something more at play? Little did John know, his daughter's fate was about to become a pawn in a much larger game. As the machines continued to beep, Emma's tiny body began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. John's heart swelled with love and gratitude as he looked at his daughter, his eyes locked on Marcus's. But as he searched for answers, he realized that sometimes the line between good and evil can be blurred, and the truth can be more complicated than we ever imagined. The hospital's doctor smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "Let's get started, shall we? We have a long road ahead of us, but I think we might just have a chance to save Emma." As the team sprang into action, John's eyes remained on Marcus, his mind reeling with questions. What did the billionaire CEO really want? And what did the future hold for Emma and for the people who cared for her? The machines beeped on, the monitors flashing with a new reading. Emma's tiny body began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. But as John looked at Marcus, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would take him on a journey he never could have imagined. And as the hospital room fell silent, the only sound the steady beep of the machines, John's eyes locked on Marcus's, a question echoing in his mind. What did the billionaire CEO really want? Marcus Thompson, the billionaire CEO, sat in his luxurious office, surrounded by sleek glass and steel, his eyes fixed on the phone ringing on his desk. It was a call he'd been expecting, though he couldn't have predicted the desperation in John's voice on the other end. "Marcus, please, you're the only one who can help us," John begged, his words laced with a mix of fear and hope. "My daughter, Emma, she's critically ill. The doctors say she won't make it through the night." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened as he listened to John's words, memories from his own childhood flooding back. He remembered the countless nights his own mother had spent in the hospital, fighting for her life against a cruel disease. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty, it all came rushing back. For a moment, Marcus was transported to that dark time, but he forced himself back to the present. He took a deep breath and focused on John's plea. "Tell me more about Emma," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "She's only 8 years old, Marcus. She's got a rare genetic disorder that's ravaging her body. The doctors say she needs a new treatment, something that only your hospital has access to. Please, Marcus, you're her only hope." Marcus's expression softened as he listened to John's words. There was something about this single father's desperation that resonated with him. He knew what it was like to feel powerless, to watch someone you love slip away. He made a decision in that moment, one that would change the course of his life forever. "John, I'll help you," Marcus said, his voice firm. "But I need you to promise me something in return." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Marcus wondered if he'd made a mistake. But then John's voice came back, laced with a hint of trepidation. "What do you need, Marcus?" Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locked on the phone. "I need you to agree to let me be a part of Emma's life, to be involved in her treatment and her care. And when she's better, I want to be there for her, to get to know her, to be a part of her life." John's hesitation was palpable, and for a moment Marcus wondered if he'd overstepped. But then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, John agreed. "Okay, Marcus, I'll do whatever it takes to save Emma's life. Yes, you can be a part of her life." Marcus nodded, even though John couldn't see him. He knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. He stood up, his eyes scanning the room as he made his way to the phone on the wall. "All right, John, I've got a team on standby. They'll be at your location in less than an hour. Get Emma to the hospital as quickly as possible." The line went dead, and Marcus stood there, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd just done. He knew that he'd set something in motion, something that would change the course of his life forever. But he had no idea just how far-reaching the consequences would be. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus's team sprang into action. They dispatched a team of experts to John's location, armed with cutting-edge technology and a determination to save Emma's life. The clock was ticking, and every second counted. Marcus stood in his office, his eyes fixed on the clock on the wall as the hours ticked by. He knew that the next few hours would be critical, that the fate of Emma's life hung precariously in the balance. But he also knew that he'd made a decision that would change his life forever, a decision that would lead him down a path he never could have imagined. And as the minutes ticked by, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what the future held for him, for John, and for Emma. Would they be able to save her life? And if they did, what would happen next? Only time would tell. As Emma underwent the experimental treatment, John couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The hospital room was filled with the hum of machines, the beeping of monitors, and the soft murmur of nurses checking on Emma's progress. John's eyes were fixed on his daughter, her tiny body hooked up to IVs and ventilators, her bright blue eyes sparkling with a faint glimmer of hope. But with each passing minute, John's anxiety grew. He knew that Emma's treatment came with a steep price, one that would change their lives forever. "John, we need to talk," a soft voice whispered into the hospital room. It was Dr. Patel, the lead researcher on Emma's case. John nodded, his eyes never leaving Emma's face. Dr. Patel cleared her throat, her expression somber. "The treatment is working, but it's not without its risks. Emma's body is responding, but her reproductive rights, they're not guaranteed." John's eyes snapped towards Dr. Patel. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Patel hesitated, her eyes darting towards the hospital's exit before settling back on John. "The treatment has the potential to alter Emma's reproductive system. It's a risk we can't ignore." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had always assumed that Emma's treatment would save her life, but he had never considered the cost. He glanced at Emma, her small body still hooked up to the machines, her eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. John's heart ached with a mix of sadness and fear. As the hospital room fell silent, John's mind began to whirl with questions. What did it mean for Emma's future? Would she be able to have children of her own? The thought sent a pang of worry through John's chest. He had always envisioned a future for Emma, one where she would grow up, fall in love, and start a family of her own. But now, with this new information, John's vision began to blur. The hospital room seemed to fade into the background as John's thoughts consumed him. He thought back to the call from Marcus Thompson, the billionaire CEO who had saved Emma's life. Marcus had been adamant that John agree to his demands, but John had hesitated. Now, with this new information, John's hesitation turned to dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus had an ulterior motive, one that went far beyond saving Emma's life. John's eyes narrowed as he thought back to their conversation. Marcus had been evasive, his words laced with a subtle threat. John's instincts had screamed warning, but he had pushed the feeling aside, convinced that Marcus was genuinely trying to help. But now, with the truth about Emma's treatment revealed, John's doubts resurfaced. Had Marcus been playing him all along? Was this some kind of twisted game, one where Emma's reproductive rights were the prize? John's mind reeled with the possibilities, his anxiety spiking as he thought about the consequences. As the hospital room began to stir, John's gaze fell back on Emma. Her small body was still hooked up to the machines, but her eyes fluttered open once more. This time, she gazed directly at John, her bright blue eyes sparkling with a hint of recognition. John's heart swelled with love and worry as he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hey kiddo, it's okay, I'm here." Emma's eyes locked onto John's, her gaze steady. For a moment, the hospital room faded into the background, and all that mattered was the love between John and his daughter. But as the machines beeped on, John knew that their lives were about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. As the hospital room came back into focus, John's eyes locked onto Dr. Patel, her expression somber. "John, we need to talk about the next steps. Emma's treatment is progressing, but we need to consider the risks. Are you willing to take that risk for your daughter?" John's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the possibilities. He thought back to Marcus's demands, the ones that had seemed so sinister just hours before. Now, with the truth about Emma's treatment revealed, John's hesitation turned to determination. "I'll do whatever it takes to save my daughter's life," John said, his voice firm. "But I need to know the truth. What's the real cost of this treatment? And what does Marcus want in exchange for saving Emma's life?" Dr. Patel's eyes darted towards the hospital's exit before settling back on John. "I'm not sure what Marcus wants, but I do know that Emma's reproductive rights are at stake. You need to decide what's more important to you, your daughter's life or her future." John's eyes locked onto Emma's, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He knew that he had to choose, but the consequences of that choice would change their lives forever. The hospital room seemed to fade into the background as John's mind reeled with the possibilities. What would he choose? Would he sacrifice Emma's reproductive rights for her life, Or would he take a chance on a future that was uncertain at best? Only time would tell. As Emma's health began to improve, John couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't quite right. At first, it was just a nagging sense of unease, but as the days turned into weeks, the hospital room became a minefield of subtle hints and unspoken intentions. Marcus's visits became more frequent, his smile broader, and his words more persuasive. John found himself wondering if he was just being paranoid or if there was something more to the billionaire's kindness. It started with small things. Emma's favorite nurse would be on duty whenever Marcus visited, and the two would spend hours talking in hushed tones while Emma slept. The hospital's administration began to make concessions that seemed almost too good to be true: extended stay privileges, private rooms, and even a personal chef to cater to Emma's every whim. John couldn't put his finger on it, but it was as if Marcus had pulled the strings from behind the scenes, manipulating the hospital's resources to suit his own mysterious agenda. As John watched Emma grow stronger, he began to notice the subtle changes in Marcus's demeanor. The billionaire's eyes would light up whenever he spoke about Emma's future, but there was something almost calculating in his gaze, something that made John wonder if he was just a pawn in a much larger game. The more John questioned Marcus's motives, the more the billionaire seemed to appear out of nowhere, his charm and charisma wrapping around John like a warm blanket. But John's gut was screaming at him to be cautious. He remembered the desperation in Marcus's voice when he first called, the urgency that bordered on obsession. What was it about Emma that had captured the billionaire's attention? Was it just a case of wealthy benefactor syndrome, or was there something more sinister at play? John's mind was racing with questions, and the more he learned about Marcus's involvement, the more he felt like he was trapped in a labyrinth with no clear exit. One evening, as John sat in the hospital room, Emma sleeping peacefully beside him, he noticed a small, unassuming folder on the bedside table. It was marked with a single word: Emma. John's curiosity got the better of him, and he picked up the folder, his heart racing as he opened it. Inside, he found a series of documents detailing Emma's medical history, along with a single sheet of paper with a cryptic message scrawled on it. The key to your daughter's future lies in her genetic makeup. John's eyes widened as the implications sunk in. Marcus wasn't just a benevolent donor. He was researching Emma's DNA, searching for something specific. But what? And why? John's mind reeled with the possibilities, but one thing was certain. He had to get to the bottom of Marcus's hidden agenda before it was too late. As the night wore on, John's anxiety grew, his thoughts consumed by the secrets Marcus was hiding. He couldn't shake off the feeling that he was walking into a trap, that Marcus's kindness was just a facade for a much darker purpose. The question on everyone's lips echoed in John's mind. What did Marcus want from Emma, and what would he do to get it? In the darkness of the hospital room, John's only comfort was the gentle beeping of the machines surrounding his daughter's bed. But as he looked down at Emma, he knew that he couldn't trust anyone, not even the people who claimed to be helping him. The truth about Marcus's intentions was still hidden, but one thing was certain: John would do whatever it took to protect his daughter, even if it meant unraveling the tangled threads of Marcus's sinister plan. As John delved deeper into the mystery surrounding Emma's recovery, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The hospital room, once a sanctuary of hope and healing, had transformed into a battleground of deceit and hidden agendas. Emma's health, which had been improving steadily, suddenly took a turn for the worse, leaving John reeling with worry. At first, he thought it was just a minor setback, but as the days turned into weeks, John began to notice a disturbing pattern. Every time Emma's condition stabilized, Marcus would appear, his smile as wide as his influence, and promise John that the experimental treatment was working. But John knew better. He had seen the financial records, the secret meetings, and the subtle manipulations that Marcus's company was using to control the narrative. John's investigation had revealed a complex web of relationships and business deals that tied Marcus's company to Emma's future. It seemed that Marcus had been using his wealth and influence to secure Emma's position as the sole beneficiary of a massive inheritance. The more John dug, the more he realized that Emma was not just a pawn in Marcus's game of power and wealth. She was the prize. As John grappled with this new information, he couldn't help but wonder what Marcus's true intentions were. Was he genuinely interested in helping Emma, or was this all just a clever ruse to get to her? The lines between right and wrong began to blur, and John found himself questioning his own morals. Was he willing to do whatever it took to save Emma, even if it meant compromising his values? John's mind was racing with questions, but one thing was certain: he couldn't trust Marcus. The CEO's smooth talk and charming smile had masked a ruthless determination to get what he wanted, no matter the cost. John knew that he had to act fast, but what could he do? The hospital was in Marcus's pocket, and the treatment was already being administered. As the hours ticked by, Emma's condition continued to deteriorate. John was at a loss, unsure of what to do next. He had tried to talk to the hospital staff, but they were too afraid to rock the boat. The only person he could turn to was Emma's mother, who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. John's phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Emma's mother, her voice trembling with urgency. "John, I know what's going on," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "I've been watching and I know Marcus's true intentions. Meet me at the coffee shop down the street. We need to talk." John's heart was racing as he hung up the phone. He knew that he was taking a risk, but he had to know the truth. As he made his way to the coffee shop, he couldn't shake off the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But he was determined to save Emma, no matter the cost. The coffee shop was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of coffee and anxiety. Emma's mother was already there, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "John, I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she said, her voice cracking. "I was afraid of what would happen if Marcus found out." John's eyes narrowed. "What do you know?" he asked, his voice firm. "I know that Marcus has been using Emma's condition to get to her," she said, her words spilling out in a rush. "He wants to get her pregnant, John. He's been manipulating the treatment, using her as a pawn in his game of power and wealth." John's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's mother hesitated. "I don't know, John, but I do know that we have to stop him. We can't let him use Emma like that." John's mind was racing with questions, but one thing was certain: he had to act fast. He knew that he couldn't trust Marcus, and he knew that he had to save Emma, no matter the cost. The question was, what would it take to stop Marcus's sinister plans? As John sat in his small apartment, surrounded by stacks of medical bills and worried thoughts, a single phrase echoed in his mind. "What if I'm wrong?" The nagging feeling of unease that had been growing since Emma's miraculous recovery had finally reached a boiling point. He couldn't shake the suspicion that something sinister was at play, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down. Determined to protect his daughter's future, John devised a desperate plan. He would dig deeper into Marcus's company, uncover the hidden agenda behind Emma's recovery, and expose the billionaire CEO's scheme for what it was. But as he delved into the treacherous landscape of corporate espionage, John knew the risks were greater than ever before. One wrong move, and he could lose everything: his daughter's health, his livelihood, and even his freedom. The stakes were raised to a point where John felt like he was walking on thin ice. Every step, every decision, every phone call could be the one that would send his world crashing down. But he couldn't back down now. The thought of Emma's future, of her happiness and well-being, was all that kept him going. As John began to navigate the complex web of Marcus's company, he encountered opposition at every turn. Lawyers, PR teams, and even security guards stood in his way, determined to keep the truth hidden from prying eyes. But John refused to be deterred. He knew he had to keep pushing forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. One of the first challenges he faced was getting past the company's formidable security system. John knew that Marcus's team would stop at nothing to keep him out, so he had to think outside the box. He began to gather a network of allies, people who might be willing to help him uncover the truth. There was Sarah, a former employee who had grown disillusioned with Marcus's tactics. Alex, a tech-savvy whistleblower who was eager to take down the billionaire CEO. And Rachel, a determined journalist who had a nose for sniffing out corruption. Together, they formed a small but powerful team. They worked tirelessly to gather evidence, to uncover the hidden truths that lay beneath the surface of Marcus's company. And as they dug deeper, they began to uncover a web of deceit and corruption that went far beyond anything John could have ever imagined. But just as they thought they were getting close to the truth, they were met with a new challenge. The company's PR team had launched a smear campaign against John, painting him as a crazed and deranged father who was harassing a respected businessman. The media was eating it up, and public opinion was starting to turn against John. As he struggled to fight back against the PR machine, John couldn't help but wonder, had he bitten off more than he could chew? Was he truly ready to take on the likes of Marcus, a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals? Or was he just a foolish father, clinging to a desperate hope that his daughter would somehow magically get better? The doubts swirled in his mind like a tornado, threatening to tear him apart. But John knew he couldn't give up now, not when Emma's future was on the line. With a newfound determination, he steeled himself for the fight ahead, ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For the sake of his daughter, he would push forward, no matter what it took. John sat in stunned silence, staring at Emma's medical chart as if it held the secrets of the universe. Her condition had taken a dramatic turn for the worse, and the hospital's doctors were baffled. The news had been delivered with the same detached tone that medical professionals often used, but John's world was crumbling around him. He couldn't help but think back to the day Emma's health began to miraculously improve. The doctors had been scratching their heads, unable to explain the sudden turnaround. John had been overjoyed, thinking that his prayers had been answered. But now, it seemed that this improvement was just a temporary reprieve. Just as John was starting to process this new information, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Emma's nurse, looking concerned. "Mr. Johnson, I need to speak with you about Emma's test results." John's heart sank as he followed the nurse to the hospital's conference room. The nurse handed John a folder containing Emma's latest test results. As he scanned the pages, his eyes widened in shock. Emma's condition was not just getting worse, it was changing. The medical professionals were baffled by the unusual readings, and John's mind was racing with questions. What was happening to Emma? Was this some kind of rare disease? And what did it have to do with Marcus's company? John's thoughts were a jumbled mix of fear, denial, and anger. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being kept in the dark. Just as John was starting to lose his grip on reality, the nurse dropped another bombshell. "Mr. Johnson, we've received some new information about Emma's past. It seems that she has a connection to Marcus's company that goes way beyond coincidence." John's eyes locked onto the nurse's, his mind racing with the implications. This was it. The truth was finally starting to surface. Emma's miraculous recovery, her changing medical condition, and her connection to Marcus's company, it all seemed to be linked. But how? And what did it mean for Emma's future? John felt like he was on the verge of a revelation, but the pieces were still scattered all over the floor. He needed time to process this new information, to think about the implications and the potential consequences. But as he looked over at Emma's hospital room, he knew he couldn't afford to wait. He had to keep pushing forward, no matter how scary or uncertain the road ahead might be. For Emma's sake, for his own sanity, he had to uncover the truth, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get there. But as he stood up, ready to face the challenge ahead, A nagging voice in his head whispered a haunting question. What if the truth is more than you can handle? John's eyes locked onto Marcus's, his mind reeling with the words that had just been spoken. You knew all along. The betrayal was suffocating, a weight that crushed the air from John's lungs. The man who had saved Emma's life, the man who had given John hope, had been playing a sinister game all along. A game of deception, of manipulation, of using Emma's life as a pawn in his twisted plan. As the truth dawned on John, his anger boiled over, a cauldron of emotions that threatened to spill out at any moment. He felt like he'd been punched in the gut, the air knocked out of him. How could Marcus do this? How could he use Emma, a child, in such a way? The thought alone was enough to make John's blood boil. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed, his expression a mask of calm indifference. I'm sorry, John, he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. I didn't mean to hurt him. The man had destroyed John's life, his trust, his very sense of reality. Emma's future was now a question mark, her health a fragile thread that could snap at any moment. John's mind was racing, trying to process the magnitude of what Marcus had done. He thought back to all the times they'd met, all the times Marcus had seemed so genuinely concerned about Emma's well-being. But it was all a lie, a carefully constructed web of deceit. John felt like he'd been living in a dream world, a world that had just been shattered into a million pieces. As he looked at Marcus, John's anger turned to disgust. How could someone be so ruthless, so calculating? It was as if Emma's life meant nothing to him, was just a means to an end. John's thoughts were a jumbled mess, his emotions in turmoil. He didn't know what to do, how to react. All he knew was that he had to confront Marcus to make him face the consequences of his actions. I want to know why, John said, his voice shaking with rage. Why did you do this, Marcus? Why did you use Emma like that? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes avoiding John's. I had my reasons, he stammered. Reasons? John's mind was screaming with questions, with demands for answers, but Marcus just sat there, his silence a deafening echo of his guilt. As the silence hung in the air, John's anger reached a boiling point. He could feel his fists clenched, his body tense with rage. He knew he had to get control of himself, to think clearly. But for now, all he could do was stare at Marcus, his mind seething with hatred and disgust. The betrayal was too much to bear, the consequences too dire. Emma's life was on the line, and John was determined to fight for her, no matter what it took. John's resolve hardened as he gazed at the hospital room's sterile walls. He couldn't just sit idly by while Marcus's company manipulated Emma's fate. The billionaire CEO's true intentions were clear: to exploit Emma's reproductive rights for his own twisted purposes. John's eyes narrowed as he pieced together the puzzle. He recalled the countless times Marcus had visited Emma, always with a gift or a favor. It was all a ruse, a calculated game to wear down Emma's defenses. Determined to protect Emma, John took a stand against Marcus's company. He rallied a team of lawyers, experts in reproductive rights, and formed a coalition to take on the corporation. The media soon picked up the story, and the public's attention was piqued. As the battle for Emma's rights gained momentum, the nation was torn. Social media platforms erupted with heated debates, with hashtags like Justice for Emma and Emma Deserves to Choose trending worldwide. John's fight reached a critical point when the court ordered a temporary halt on Emma's reproductive treatments. The decision sparked outrage among the public, with many calling for Emma's rights to be protected. Meanwhile, Marcus's company launched a smear campaign against John, branding him a self-serving father who only cared about his own interests. The tension was palpable as the outcome hung in the balance. Would John's courageous stand prevail, or would Marcus's deep pockets silence the opposition? As the clock ticked down, John's voice grew louder, more resolute. He was no longer just fighting for Emma's rights. He was fighting for the rights of every woman, every child, and every individual who had ever been manipulated by the powerful. The stakes were high, but John's conviction never wavered. He was willing to take down an empire to ensure Emma's future was hers alone to decide. With each passing moment, the world watched, waiting with bated breath for the outcome. Would justice be served, or would the system fail Emma once again? The question lingered, a ticking time bomb, as the battle for Emma's rights reached its climax. The fate of countless lives hung in the balance, and only time would tell if John's courageous stand would be enough to change the course of history. As Emma settled into her new home, surrounded by the familiar walls and the comforting presence of her father, she couldn't help but think about the incredible journey that had brought her here. The scandal that had shaken the foundations of Marcus's empire had ultimately secured her future, protecting her rights and giving her a sense of freedom she had never known before. John's eyes still lingered on the memory of that fateful day, when the truth had finally come to light. He remembered the weight of his daughter's tiny hand in his, the way her bright eyes had sparkled with hope as they'd navigated the treacherous waters of the hospital's corridors. And he recalled the unyielding determination that had driven him to fight for Emma's rights, to stand up against the billionaire CEO who had sought to exploit her for his own twisted purposes. Looking back, John realized that the journey had been as much about him as it had been about Emma. He had discovered a strength within himself, a resolve to stand up for what was right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as he gazed at his daughter, now thriving in her new home, he knew that their story would be one of hope and resilience, a testament to the power of courage and determination. But as Emma began to build a new life, free from the shadows of Marcus's empire, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much to explore. The world beyond their little bubble beckoned, full of promise and possibility. And John, sensing his daughter's restlessness, smiled knowingly, aware that this was just the beginning of their next great adventure together. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Emma's smile grew brighter, her laughter more contagious. She was no longer the fragile, vulnerable girl who had been at the center of the scandal. She was a young woman, strong and determined, ready to take on the world. And John, watching her with pride, knew that he had done everything he could to give her the best possible chance at life. But as they stood together, looking out at the world beyond their little home, John couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would they face new challenges, new battles to fight? Or would their journey be one of peace and harmony, free from the shadows of the past? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Their story was far from over, and the best was yet to come.